My guest today on Good Law, Bad Law is Bill Myers. Bill is the author of his new book, the second in a series, and it's called An Engineered Injustice. Bill's also a practicing attorney here in Philadelphia. His first novel and his second novel are soaring on the charts on Amazon. I read this book, and it's really a page-turner, and you're going to love it if you take a listen to this episode. You'll hear all about it. Thanks for tuning in. My guest today is Bill Myers. Bill, thanks so much for being on Good Law, Bad Law.
Aaron, thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
We had you on this program last summer on the occasion of your first novel, and now we're having you back to talk about your second novel.
And I'm really happy about that.
I'm happy about it too. I read the book, An Engineered Injustice, and it is everything people are saying about it. I'm not blowing smoke. It's really good. I couldn't put it down.
Thank you.
And a really, really good read. But, you know, for people who don't perhaps remember the last time we had you on, you are a lawyer and you sort of started your novel writing career on the side, and now it's really taking off.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do as a lawyer, and then we'll get into the subject of the book.
Well, I live just outside Philadelphia. I practice in Philadelphia. I do personal injury work representing injured people. I have a niche representing injured railroad workers, which is one of the motivating factors behind An Engineered Injustice. So I enjoy...
And you've done that for...
I've done that for
a few years now.
Yeah, almost 25 years.
Yeah.
And represented injured railroad workers literally up and down the East Coast from Boston to Boca Raton.
And you wrote your first book, which came out last year, is called what?
A Criminal Defense.
And we talked about that, but just it helps to set the scene for your second book, which isn't quite a sequel, but some of the same characters come up in the second book, but with a different focus. So the first book is really from the perspective of a lawyer who is a criminal defense attorney, and he gets into this crazy case that he's involved in, representing an old friend of his in a murder trial.
Right.
And now in the second book, we're learning about a case and hearing a story about a case involving one of the younger lawyers in that same law firm.
Right. So it's the same universe of characters. It's just that Vaughn, who is the protagonist in An Engineered Injustice, played a minor role in a criminal defense. And Vaughn he's a young, idealistic criminal defense attorney, and he is approached by his cousin, who's an engineer on a train that has crashed, to walk him through whatever comes up. And what you'll learn in the book is that Vaughn and his cousin Eddie share a past, and it's a past in which Vaughn did something very bad to Eddie that derailed his life, so he owes Eddie. And the whole family knows about it. No one outside the family knows about it, but everyone in the family knows about it.
Right. And Eddie, the cousin, is in big trouble because he's the engineer on this train that derails, and a lot of people are hurt, a number of people are killed. And at first blush, when you first hear the story of what happened, it sure looks like it's Eddie's fault.
Yeah, because the train that he's driving, it's a high-speed Amtrak passenger train, and it crashes into a very large track maintenance vehicle, 100 feet long, 20 feet high, bright yellow, and it happens during the day, and the question is, how could he not have seen this enormous track maintenance vehicle and just driven his train into it, not slowed down, not braked, not done anything to warn anybody? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And Eddie, because he had physical injuries himself, doesn't remember what happened. And that becomes a key focal point of the case. Does he really not remember what happened, or is he hiding something?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And as the plot unfolds, certain things come out where he has misled Vaughn about some things that actually happened inside the engine right before the crash.
Right. And it's the tension that builds is the presumption that Eddie really is at fault just gets thicker and stronger as the first part of the story goes. And I'm not going to give away any of the key details, but you work in all these twists and turns into the story in such, so many unexpected. Oh my God, that really happened. That kind of a twist and turn. So it keeps your interest and the suspense as you're working through what really happened. But I'm so fascinated with the story because, in addition to it being a great book, and anybody, who likes thrillers and suspense and in particular legal thrillers is going to think this is a great read. But it's fascinating to me because we had a very infamous, a very notorious and well-known train crash, an Amtrak crash, right outside of Philadelphia here a couple of years ago. And there are aspects of the crash that's the centerpiece of your novel that sound very familiar. And there are characters in the novel, lawyers, who I almost feel like I know, or parts of their character I recognize. So it's fascinating how you construct all of this and where you get your inspiration. Obviously you have a background as handling railroad cases. You know something about it going in, but talk a little bit about how you came about building. And we don't want to give too much of the story away either. Sure. But how do you draw from your experiences, the characters from our legal community and elsewhere, this particular crash that I'm referring to and that I know you're familiar with as well? How do you build the nuts and bolts of your story from those real life experiences? Right.
Well, this crash is actually based on a number of different crashes. The train crash that you're talking about outside of Philadelphia, another train crash where I represent some of the injured railroaders where a train collided with a piece of equipment, some crashes that happened out in California where trains collided with piece of equipment. And the issues are all they're all the same. Why is it, and the key one being, why is it that the engineer didn't stop the train before the crash? In one case, it's why didn't he stop the train before it went around a sharp curve? In a number of the cases, it's why didn't he stop the train before it collided with a tractor trailer truck or another train or another piece of on-track equipment? And so the focus of the investigations in all these cases is always on the engineer, and there's always a presumption, what did the engineer do wrong? And there's a rush to judgment.
It's like in an airline crash, you'd be focused on the pilot.
Right, what did the pilot do wrong? Yeah. And part of what I've learned representing railroad workers is you can have something catastrophic happen where it's not the engineer's fault, but there's always going to be a rush to judgment. I remember in the one train crash that you were referring to, within a day, the mayor of the city got on TV and basically hung this guy out to dry. Yeah. And people have been pushing to prosecute that engineer criminally as well. But the characters that are involved, none of the characters in the book are drawn from actual living characters. There are certain things that that people in real life do that I have these characters do. But the characters themselves, the good guys and the bad guys, are just drawn from whole cloth.
Well, and from pieces of experience, right? You've known a lot of lawyers in your experience, and you've known a lot of railroad people in your experience too. So some of what is in these characters are things that someone might say or what someone might do or how they might hold themselves out, what they might look like on TV if they gave an interview. Things like that are just part of your 25 years of being a lawyer.
Sure. For example, look, if you're going to write a legal thriller, some of the scenes are going to happen in a courtroom. Nowadays, if you're going to have a big catastrophic situation, some of the lawyers will call press conferences and talk about the case, and so that's in the book as well. Yeah.
What about this is the second book. So and there's going to be a third book too. I know, right? This is
Yeah.
part of a 3-book series.
Right.
We should. Well, what I'm gonna want to ask you, how much about the third book can you tell us? Is it finished? Is it?
The
Are
third
you
book
still
is
writing
actually, no, I have finished my draft. It is now with Amazon for their in-house editorial review.
it? Okay.
So.
Well, I mean, so it's very early on to talk about it. But I mean, how does, as the third book in the series, how does it fit in? Are you taking a different character from the same law firm and having them be the focus of the story?
In the third book, which is going to be called A Killer's Alibi, the protagonist is once again Mick, who's the protagonist in
Okay.
the first book.
Okay.
I'm taking a major character from the second book, which is the organized crime figure, Jimmy Nunzio,
Yeah.
right? And bringing him in to play a central role in the third book. In An Engineered Injustice, Jimmy Nunzio, who's a local Philadelphia capo, his son is killed in the train wreck. So he's out for blood. And he assumes, like everybody else, that the engineer is to blame, and he doesn't want to wait for the legal process.
Right. He wants his own justice.
He wants his own justice
Yeah.
and fast.
Yeah.
I think at some point in the book he says to Vaughn, who's trying to tell him, give me some more time, it'll be soon, I'll figure this out. And he says, sometimes soon isn't soon enough.
Yeah.
And Eddie comes close to suffering Nunzio's justice. But in the third book, A Killer's Alibi, Nunzio himself is caught at the scene of a crime, at the scene of a murder, and it looks like he did it, and he calls on Mick to get him out of it, and you wonder, how in the world is Mick going to get him out of it? He's there, he has a knife in his hand, there's a dead guy bleeding, and so it ties it in.
So in all three, again, it's like you're loading it up in the front of the story that things look a certain way. That, in the first book, the guy who's accused of murder, it looks like he did it. The engineer of the train in the book that's currently out, it looks like he really was responsible. He was doing something, he wasn't paying attention in some way. And in the third, it looks like this guy who's already known to be associated with a criminal organization.
Right.
He's holding a knife in his hand. It must be that he did it. But then the story gets going, and you see that things aren't what you thought they were. Talk about that a little bit. Is that, I mean, we who handle cases and see things unfold, as from the initial meeting that you have with a client through, let's say, to the time of trying a case or settling a case, cases do take on a life, and it isn't always what you think it is in the beginning. Is that something you must have seen in your experience, and does that help you with this?
I see it all the time. I'm sure you see it all the time in your practice. A client walks in, tells you what he knows about an event. You start taking depositions. Other witnesses tell you what they know about an event. And you may think you know what happened when you start a case, but as the case unfolds, as more people are questioned, as more facts come in, it becomes more nuanced. Sometimes you're flat out wrong, and sometimes it's even worse than your client or you thought it was at the very beginning. But stories do unfold that way. And I think that's what we like about stories. Nobody wants to read a story where they open the book and they know what's going to happen or why. One of the great pleasures in the book is, in any book, any story, is you hear about characters, you learn a little bit about them, and as the story unfolds, they become more complicated, more layered, the story becomes more sophisticated. What seems to be a clear shot from point A to point B takes a lot of detours, and it's the uncovering of all those mysteries that make it enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, and, lots of people write legal thrillers, or suspenseful novels that are built around a case or built ultimately around a trial. I mean, the courtroom brings with it so much drama, except for all the hours we spend waiting around for something to happen.
Right.
But I think the reason there's such a draw to the courtroom as the centerpiece or the climax of a novel or a movie is because there is this incredible drama. There is a lot that we think we know what's going to happen, but the potential for something unexpected is so great. But though a lot of people may write about the law or write about stories that involve cases or courtrooms, you've lived it and done it, and so your stories have an authenticity because you have that experience. There's still things you go, oh my God, no, that didn't really happen, but you know that you've been there and seen these things, and I think that's something that that gives your stories a real authenticity that's pretty powerful.
Well, thank you. And I do try to bring that into it. And it's not that hard because, and I'm sure you've experienced this in court yourself, you're standing there, you're questioning a witness. And it might be your own side's witness, it might be the other side's witness. And you feel like you're juggling on a roller coaster because you don't know what's going to happen next. You think you know what the answer to the question will be. Maybe 90% of the time you get the answer you expect.
Yep.
But every now and then you get an answer that comes from out of nowhere. You haven't prepared for it. You haven't thought about it.
So true.
And you got to stand there and think something up and make the jury think that you expected this answer and you have an answer to the answer.
Right.
It's scary. It raises your blood pressure. It turns your hair gray. And you don't forget those moments. So and I'm sure you could do the same thing. You could probably right now pull up some memory you have in a courtroom and your blood pressure will rise because it was that scary.
It's absolutely true. And as lawyers, we talk about this, and we're getting ready for a trial a couple weeks in our office. And so we talk about preparation, and all the things that you want to do to be organized and look organized and prepare and talk to your client and get ready in this way and research that. But it is also true that the one thing that you know for sure about a case going to trial is that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And that is what's exciting about it.
That is. It's what's exciting about it. It's also what's terrifying about it. And it's why people will come and watch trials. It's why people watch trials on TV and in movies, because you can feel the tension, you can feel the risk, and there's usually a lot at stake. Somebody's freedom could be at stake, or millions of dollars could be at stake. It's real risk, or both.
In your book, both are at stake.
Both are at stake, yeah.
So what about trial do you think, as a trial lawyer, as lawyers tried cases, which you can't say about everybody that writes about crime and law and courtrooms. What about that experience for you, do you think, helps you? And it might not just be developing a plot, but helps what you're bringing into your novels, do you think?
What I think I bring into the novels that maybe somebody who's not a lawyer can't bring in is what's going on inside the attorney's mind as he's actually giving an opening statement, asking witnesses questions. Jurors can see what's going on from the outside. People who write other books, legal thrillers who aren't lawyers can see what happens from the outside. But you and I know what goes on inside a lawyer's mind, how it's spinning at 100 miles an hour, how you're trying to get ready for what if he says this, what if he says this, and how the lawyer feels when the other lawyer does something he's not supposed to do, or when there's a witness on the stand who is being snaky and liking it, and you just want to find some way to draw the truth out of him, and he's fighting you tooth and nail. It's all the stuff that goes on internally in a lawyer's mind that I can bring to the novel because I've been there.
Right, and you even talk about a lawyer's blood pressure, and I think people may have a perception of lawyers as boring, or just preparing and just focusing on facts and documents and things. But in fact, particularly with courtroom work, and so trial isn't just about the moments that happen inside the courtroom itself. It's all the work that has to be done to get you there, all the investigation, all the work, talking to witnesses, all of that. And I think what a lot of people don't fully understand is that it involves such risk. I talk about this all the time with my clients, and when we're talking about how to think about a trial, the risks involved. Good risks to take, bad risks to take, whether it's a question you're going to ask or not ask, whether it's a document you're going to show or not show, and so on. but your characters are taking incredible risks. I mean, they're doing things that are either going to pay off hugely or they're going to bomb terribly.
Yeah. Vaughn, for example, has been told by Jimmy Nunzio, the organized crime leader, if you don't figure this out basically in a way that shows me your cousin didn't do this, I'm going to take my vengeance on him. So Vaughn knows that his cousin's life is at stake. He also gets the very real sense that his own life is at stake because Nunzio, who catches him in a lie once, basically says, if you ever lie to me again, and then he's very colorful in his description of what he's going to do.
And his whole family is looking at him, is staring at Vaughn and saying, you've got to make this work out okay.
Yeah, and Eddie's father particularly has a scene with Vaughn where he sits Vaughn down and basically makes it clear, you know what you did to him. We all know what you did to him. You owe him. And Vaughn says, I know, and I'm going to do my best. And the father says, that's not good enough.
Right.
This debt has been building interest for 15 years. You have to get him off. So that's what it is for Vaughn. It's not a question of fighting the good fight, doing your best. He absolutely has to get his client, Eddie, off, and in a way where it's clear to everyone, including Jimmy Nunzio, that Eddie didn't crash this train.
Now, I've asked you about the law experience you've had and how that influences and gives you ideas for the books. Has it worked in reverse at all so far? I mean, now you've been doing the writing for a few years. You've got 2 books out, 2 fully realized books, and a 3rd on the way. Is there anything about your experience now as a writer and developing these stories that you see coming back to you in how you practice as a lawyer, how you handle real cases?
Yes, absolutely.
Talk about that, because that's fascinating.
Okay, I'll step you back 30 years. When I was a young lawyer, I remember I put together this giant legal brief, and I showed it to my mentor who was going to submit it to the court. His name was Jimmy Coleman. He was at Ballard's Bar. He said, Bill, great facts. There's no story here. All I'm reading is facts. You've got to give me a story. And ever since that time, I've tried to, whenever I'm doing anything, whether it's legal writing, trying a case, put the facts into a story. Since I started writing the books and really got a truer sense of what a story is, I think I've been much more effective in court and writing briefs, talking to judges, in not just saying, these are the facts, this is what happened, but really creating a story that people can follow and that resonates with them on a human level. Because if you're talking to jurors, they are people. And they don't want to just hear a recitation of facts and this is why it's their fault and my guy's fault. They want to feel that what's going on here is part of a larger story involving human beings, and they got to understand that if they rule in your client's favor, then the story is coming to the end that it should come to, that it rightfully, morally, principally should come to.
Yeah, I mean, people, there's that old expression, are you going to make a federal case out of that? And we have to do that all the time, whether we're in federal court or state court. We have to tell a story in a way that a jury's going to sit up and feel it's important, and they want to dive into that story and feel something from it. I was a journalist, investigative journalist for 8 years before I was a lawyer, and I think about that all the time. It's not just about analyzing documents or interviewing witnesses. Then you have to put that together in a story. And I know from my own experience, from the first conversation I have with a client, I'm already thinking about someday standing in front of a jury and thinking, what is the story that I'm going to be telling that jury? And what do I have to do to put the pieces together to make that the best story possible?
Right, and to make the jury feel that what they're doing is right. Think about it this way. As a voter, you have a vote out of millions of votes. And as a part of an enormous group, you can affect change. If you're a juror and you're one of 12 people, you have absolute power to affect positive change to do something that's right. And, it can be appealed, maybe overturned, but as a juror in our democracy, you have a power that nobody else has. You have a power to decide between people from your community, or maybe from people from your community versus some huge corporation from who knows where.
Yep. Or the government.
Or the government. You have the power to decide right and wrong, which I think that is, it's not just, I think, your greatest responsibility as a member of our society. It's also your greatest opportunity to actually do something that is right.
Well, the episode of this program that we have up right now involves these young people, mostly from the West Coast, who are suing the federal government over climate change.
Right.
It's, the power of the courtroom to resolve big issues, whether it's, climate change is one of the great big issues we face now, or someone's life, whether they go to jail or not. That all happens ultimately in and around a courtroom. It's so the drama and the importance of those stories is there every time.
Absolutely.
Did you do any for this book? I mean, you have the experience as a railroad lawyer. There's certainly news stories to draw on about some of these real railroad accidents, that pieces of which come together in your story. What other kind of actual research did you have to do to make the story as real sounding as it is?
Well, I drew from some of my experience in handling railroad cases. I knew who some of the railroad players would be if there's a crash, who's going to go out to the crash site, who's going to pull the data, who is going to investigate it, how's the NTSB actually organized, the National Transportation Safety Board, how do they actually investigate an accident like this? And so I pulled all of that into it. I read transcripts from some of the NTSB interviews of
real cases.
Real cases, including the Train 188 case outside of Philadelphia, to get a sense for how they actually unfold. How is it the same as a deposition? How is it different from a deposition?
Wow. And how did you find the writing this time? I know when I spoke to you about the first book, you talked about how sometimes it just came in bits and pieces. You might be out walking the dog or something like that, and bits and pieces would come to you. But I think I remember you describing it as it was a struggle. People think, oh, I want to write, and it sounds so glamorous and so wonderful. It's really hard.
Yeah.
But this time, what did you find?
Well, the first book, it took me 2 years to write, and it was a struggle. I think a big part of it was I was teaching myself how to write. This book almost seemed to write itself. Amazon, who's my publisher, made it clear what they wanted. They wanted more of a plot-driven novel with a strong female character in it to play off of the protagonist, more physical risk for the characters. And so once I knew exactly what my goals were, it became easy. I think I wrote this book, Aaron, in 4 months. And at times it seemed like it was writing itself instead of the other way around.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And what about the third? How was that also easier in terms of the writing for you, or?
It was between the two. The third one took close to a year to write. It's more like the first novel in that a lot of what happens is more character-based, and you're really learning about these layered characters who aren't all good or all bad. Unlike in an engineered injustice, the bad guys, they're bad.
Yeah.
And the good guys, they're good. They may do some bad things,
They have a past, but they're dealing with it.
Yeah. In A Killer's Alibi, the third book that's coming out, where you have Jimmy Nunzio, his wife, his daughter, and you have Mick and his whole team. There's a lot of good and bad things going on almost on both sides. And there's also a second plot in the book where Mick's wife, Piper, who does the firm's own in-house Innocence Project, is representing a woman who was accused and convicted at 19 of killing her father. And Piper becomes convinced that she didn't do it, she was set up. And so you have that whole thing. Did she do it? Didn't she do it? Is she lying to us? And that whole thing unfolds at the same time as the Nunzio drama unfolds.
Incredible. Good stuff. Are any talk of movies coming out of these? Because I mean, I know I felt as I was reading this current book,
Yeah,
An Engineered Injustice, I think somebody's gonna make a movie of this book.
I hope so. I mean, the books, all three books are now represented by CAA, which is the biggest talent agency out in California.
Right.
So they're looking to sell it, and now that the third book is done, once Amazon does its final edits, they'll go out as a package, and now you have this whole universe of characters and multiple storylines that happen over time, so that they could either be developed for feature film or traditional TV series, or like they're doing now on HBO and Netflix, like 10 episodes of this, 10 episodes of that, which I think would be really cool.
That would be so cool.
Yeah.
More certain to cause us to binge watch in my home. Bill, it's fantastic. Best of luck to you. I know the book's already doing great, and I hope the success continues.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having
so much.
me on. I
It was
really
great.
appreciate it.